Chapter 10. God's Healing Spring, John 5. One of the amazing things about the Bible is that it is historically reliable. The Pool of Bethesda was not just a figment of the Apostle John's imagination. It was a real geographical place. Erwin W. Lutzer wrote, "This pool has been excavated and can now be seen today within the walls on the eastern side of the old city of Jerusalem." Archaeologists have recently discovered that under the Pool of Bethesda there was an intermittent spring. This spring caused the water level in the pool to rise suddenly. In Jesus' time, people believed that this sudden flow of water had healing powers. In chapter 5 of his gospel, John set the record straight. Jesus went to Jerusalem for a feast. John 5:1. John did not record exactly which feast this was. We know that the Jews had 3 festivals where it was considered mandatory for the faithful to make their way to Jerusalem. These festivals were Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Several commentators think that John was referring to the Feast of Tabernacles in this passage. There was a special pool in Jerusalem. John 5:2. Consider the location of this pool. This pool was situated near the sheep gate. Jerusalem has a wall around it for the purpose of security. At regular intervals, this wall has gates. Each gate is named. The sheep gate was the name of the entrance where sacrificial sheep were brought. It was located at the northeast corner of the old city. Consider the name of this pool. This pool was called Bethesda. The word Bethesda means house of mercy. It was believed that God would show his mercy to those who would get themselves into this pool when the waters were stirred. Consider the structure of this pool. This pool was surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. For many years, skeptics ridiculed John's description of this pool. Then archaeologists found this pool by the sheep gate that really was made in 2 parts with 5 covered colonnades, 1 in the middle and 2 on each end. The skeptics were silenced. Many disabled people used to lie there, verse 3. People felt that if they could only bring their disabled family member to this pool at the right time, the family member would be healed. So there were many disabled people who hung out at the pool. These people had a variety of disabilities. Some were blind, others were lame, still others were paralyzed. At this point, we face a textual problem. Some who believe that the King James Version is the best translation of the scriptures critique modern translations for leaving out verse 4. The problem with their critique is that the verse 4 is not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. The King James Version was translated before these early manuscripts were discovered. When the verse numbering was done, the assumption was that this verse was part of the text. Now that it has been discovered that verse 4 was not part of the earlier texts, but was added for explanation purposes, it seems like verse 4 is missing. In fact, verse 4 is not missing because it was not in the original text. We are not to add or subtract from God's word. Now we get back to our story in John 5. Jesus focused his attention on one disabled person, verses 5 to 9. Among the crowds of disabled people who were at this pool, Jesus focused on one man. This man was an invalid. He was paralyzed and was not able to walk. He had been an invalid for 38 years. He was one of the many who were waiting for a chance to get healed. So far, he had not been successful, so he waited. Consider what Jesus did. Jesus saw this man lying there. We are not told why Jesus focused his attention on this man, but Jesus did. Jesus still takes a personal interest in people. Jesus also learned about this man. Jesus did not use his divine ability to know all things to discover the truth about this man. He must have asked someone about him. Otherwise, John would not have said that Jesus learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. Jesus asked this man a question. Do you want to get well? What kind of a question was that? Of course this man wanted to get well. This was the reason that he was lying there by the pool, wasn't it? Jesus' question had more wisdom behind it than it may first appear. Jesus was asking the man if he was prepared for a change of his lifestyle. This man had been paralyzed for 38 years. He had grown familiar with the way things were. Many people in that kind of a situation are not open to change. Consider how this man responded. This man tried to explain his situation to Jesus. He was a lonely man. He said, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. Verse 7. Not only was he lonely, but he was in need of assistance. He did not have the strength to help himself. Some people think that God helps those who help themselves, but for this man, it was not possible for him to help himself. He was stuck in a helpless and even hopeless situation. Verse 7. He believed in the superstitions of his day. He believed that he needed to get into the pool first in order to be healed. He was frustrated by the fact that he was not able to do so. Consider what Jesus did. Jesus did not bother helping this man into the pool. That would only have supported the superstition. Jesus asked this man to do something impossible. Get up, verse 8. When Jesus said these words, he was inviting the paralyzed man to trust him. They both knew that to get up was something which was impossible in his condition, but Jesus wanted this man to trust him. Jesus was not going to make a fool out of him. Jesus was going to give him the ability to do precisely what he had asked him to do. Jesus was also inviting this man to obey him. Pick up your mat and walk, verse 8. Until now, this man had needed his mat. He had been lying on it for a long time. Now that he could get up, his mat didn't need to stay where it was. He could pick it up. He could walk away from his old way of living. That was what Jesus wanted him to do. Jesus was going to demonstrate to this man that the power to heal did not come from the stirring of the pool, but from the person who was standing right in front of him. Consider what the man did. This man trusted Jesus. At once the man was cured, verse 9. He got up without any assistance from anyone because he had trusted in Jesus to heal him. This man also obeyed Jesus. He picked up his mat and walked, verse 9. He did exactly what Jesus had told him to do. Remember this, when Jesus tells us to do something impossible, he also gives us the ability to do it. Jesus faded back into the crowd, verses 9 to 13. John reported that Jesus had done this healing on the Sabbath. The Jewish leaders considered themselves to be the guardians of the Sabbath law. When they saw this man walking around with his mat, they felt like they had to stop him. The Jews reminded this man about their law. It is the Sabbath, they said. The law forbids you to carry your mat, verse 10. The law they were referring to was from the Mishnah, a collection of supplementary laws which were supposed to clarify the laws of Moses. The law they were referring to is found in Mishnah number 39. This law clarifies what can and cannot be done on the Sabbath day. This man gave his reply. The man who made me well told me to carry my mat. He said to me, pick up your mat and walk. The Jewish leaders were not the ones who made him well. Jesus had done that. This man was more prepared to obey Jesus than he was prepared to obey the Jewish leaders. This made the Jewish leaders angry. The Jews asked this man a question. Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? Verse 12. The Jewish leaders wanted a lead. They wanted to find Jesus. If Jesus was telling people to do things like this on the Sabbath, then he was their enemy. This man did not know the answer. He did not really know who healed him. He was yet to discover the answer to our question, who is Jesus? There was a reason for his ignorance. Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there, verse 13. Jesus knew that the Jews were after him. Jesus did not stay around to get into a conflict with them. He had made himself scarce for the moment. Jesus found this man in the temple, verses 14 and 15. The temple was a good place for Jesus to introduce himself to this man. Jesus would have some protection there. See, you are well again, verse 14. This was Jesus' way of reminding him about their previous encounter. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you, verse 14. Jesus did not specify which sin this man was committing, but the man knew what it was. We are all aware of the sins in our lives which separate us from God. This man told the Jews what he had discovered. It was Jesus who had made him well. Jesus brings God's healing into our lives both physically and spiritually. Jesus frees us from the curse of the law. We are not bound by man-made regulations. Jesus empowers us to stop sinning. He gives us the strength to say no to our sinful nature. Who did this miraculous sign point towards? The healing of the paralyzed man pointed towards Jesus. Jesus is God's healing spring.